That's seen better days.
Hello guys and welcome back to Car Obsession. If you are a relatively new subscriber, you may have never seen this car. This is my Mk2 Saint-Laurent Cupra, otherwise known as Leo. And for my regular subscribers, you may have thought that I've sold him because he, like I say, hasn't featured on the channel in such a long time. The reason for that is because, well, in all honesty, I haven't really had anything to film with him, but today he is getting some much needed TLC. He's getting an engine oil service, I'm replacing the spark plugs and also the pollen filter. I'm also going to give him a really good clean. He's quite dirty, but that won't be filmed. I'll do that off camera. So yes, first thing I'm going to do, before I do anything, I'm just going to check the levels under the bonnet, make sure nothing's low, make sure nothing's leaking. The engine oil is being replaced anyway, so I don't need to worry too much about that. I'm going to put an engine flush through the system. Some of you may believe in that kind of thing, some of you may not. And I'm also going to put a fuel treatment in there as well, which should improve fuel economy. Yes, I know it's a stage 1 turbocharged hot hatchback. Why do I care about fuel economy? But as Tesco says, every little helps. So enough waffling, let's get on to the servicing.
As you can see, the oil was low, but it doesn't really matter as it's being replaced anyway. A little tip for you, leave your oil filler cap somewhere that won't allow you to close the bonnet. This way you won't forget to refit it.
Now you may think that oil is the most important fluid of this video. You're wrong. It's coffee. That's good. A present from Mrs. Car Obsession. Got some funny themed warning lights on it. There we are. Good present, Mrs. Car Obsession. Well done. Anyway, onwards.
For this job you will need a ratchet, T25 Torx bit, 19mm socket, flathead screwdriver, 36mm socket, 16mm deep socket, ratchet extension, torque wrench, long nose pliers, and a spark plug gap tool is a good idea if you have one. As I was giving Leo a health check, I also needed a pry bar, brake bar to loosen the wheel bolts, torch, tyre tread depth gauge, as well as a battery tester. Quick disclaimer guys, although I do work in a car repair garage, I'm not a trained mechanic. I'm part of the office staff, so I'm a hobbyist. Removing the undertray is the simple job of removing all of the T25 fixings. Unfortunately, my camera had stopped filming whilst I removed the sump bung, but for this you'll need a 19mm socket. If you happen to have an aftermarket sump bung, then you may need a different size socket. Be sure to dispose of your old engine oil in the correct manner. Whilst the oil was draining, it was a good idea to give Leo a good check over. I started off by spinning the wheels to check for any brake bind or bearing noise. I also wobbled the wheel to check for any play in the suspension, steering or wheel bearing. With the wheels off, I checked the tread depth as well as checking for any cuts, bulges, cracking or uneven wear. As you can see, the front brake pads have plenty of meat on them, but they were only replaced earlier in the year and I've not done many miles since then. Don't forget to check the inner brake pad to make sure it's wearing at the same rate as the outer brake pad. If it isn't, then you have a problem there that needs addressing or investigating. If you have the luxury of having access to a ramp, it gives you great visibility on what's going on underneath the car. One area worth double checking is the front lower arm rear bushes, as they often perish and crack on Volkswagen Automotive Group vehicles, but as you can see, the ones on Leo are as solid as a rock. I also checked the rear suspension as well as the rear brake pads and discs, plus the exhaust and just anything that might need double checking, such as the brake hoses. One thing that should go without saying, although I must admit I almost forgot to check them, are your lights. Make sure they're working and operational. Once the oil was drained, it was time to fit the new sump bung, which was torqued to 30 Newton meters. Next up was the oil filter housing, which is located at the front of the engine. To begin with, you've got this cap which simply screws off. You'll need a 36mm socket to remove the housing, but before you do so, make sure to open up this valve to drain out the excess oil. If you don't, it's going to get very messy when removing the housing. Take the old filter out and also remove the seal using a pair of long nose pliers. I used a genuine filter this time around, as weirdly it was cheaper than buying a MAN filter, but as you can see, MAN actually makes the filter for Seat, so it is the same filter. After giving the housing a clean, I fitted the new seal, making sure it was lubricated with new engine oil. I placed it into the housing, making sure that the tab is facing up. Make sure it's seated correctly, then it's a case of pushing the new filter in. Once more, make sure it's seated correctly. Before putting the housing back into the car, it's a good idea to pour some fresh engine oil into it, but not too much, otherwise you'll make a mess when trying to refit it. Once tightened, it was torqued to 30 Newton meters. Of course, it was now time to fill the engine up with fresh engine oil. This engine can either take 5W30 engine oil or 5W40. This is kind of down to personal preference, but if your car is remapped like mine, it's recommended to use 5W40, which as you can see, that's what I'm using. The Mk2 Cupra takes 4.6 litres, but to begin with I put in around 4 litres, allow the engine to run before rechecking. The reason for doing this is because the capacity may be 4.6 litres, but sometimes when you drain all the oil, not all of it comes out, so if you were to put the 4.6 litres back in, there is the chance of overfilling the engine, which can be just as bad as underfilling the engine. Whilst it was on my mind, I tested the battery, as the last few starts on Leo have been a little bit sluggish. As you can see, the battery is still good, but it needs a recharge. With the engine oil done, I turned my attention to the spark plugs. If, like me, you don't have an engine cover, access to them is very easy. You'll need to remove the connectors for the ignition coils, which can be done by undoing the tabs and sliding the connectors off. Be careful though, as the tabs can break easily. Once the connectors are all off, it's a case of pulling the ignition coils out, but mine were a bit stubborn. The ignition coil on cylinder 4 was surprisingly grubby, some moisture had somehow got in there. I cleaned it out, but I'll be sure to monitor the situation. To remove the plugs, you'll need a 16mm deep socket. Life is made easier with a specific spark plug socket, but a standard one is fine, and that's what I used. Like the ignition coil, the spark plug on cylinder 4 had certainly seen better days. Thankfully, the other spark plugs look to be in much better condition. Spark plugs come pre-gapped from the manufacturer, but there's no harm in checking the gap is correct, as the plugs could have been damaged or they could be defective. If the gap isn't correct, the spark won't be at the best of its ability, therefore the engine won't be as efficient. Some say that the torque setting for the plugs is 25 Newton meters, which I imagine would be fine, but the Haynes manual said 30, so that's what I went with. Once the new plugs were in, it was time to refit the ignition coils. As they had been difficult to remove, I applied a bit of lubrication, so the next time I need to remove them, it should be easier. Once the coils are back in, refit the connectors and you're good to go. That left the Pollen filter, which is extremely easy to fit. It's located in the front passenger footwell, and to remove it, you'll need to slide this cover to the left, and it's a case of pulling the old filter out. The difference between the old one and the new one is very clear, which is why it's important to keep on top of these maintenance items. Fitting the new filter is a case of sliding it up into the housing and fitting the cover back on, sliding it to the right to secure it. Once the service work was done, it was time to give Leo a much needed hoover. I'll be honest, I don't think I've ever seen so many crumbs in one place. Yeah, sorry about that, Leo. For those of you wondering how to replace the air filter, I don't have to worry about such things as I have the Revo induction kit. As it so happens though, I still have the old engine cover, so I can demonstrate how to replace it. Because the engine cover also makes up part of the intake system, the air filter is located in the engine cover at the back. To replace it, you'll need to remove the engine cover, turn upside down, loosen these screws, they don't need to be fully removed, and lift the panel up. Simply remove the old filter, replace it with a new one, put the panel back on and screw it back into place, and of course refit the engine cover.
So, a job well done. All I need to do now is to pack up my tools, pack them away, and also double check the tyre pressures and adjust it accordingly. Before then, we're going to tuck into some lovely lunch. I think I've deserved it. Bacon sandwich and a salted caramel milkshake. Lovely stuff. If you have enjoyed this video or found it useful, be sure to like, comment and subscribe. If you are subscribed, don't forget to click the bell icon so you get notified every time I make a video. But until the next time guys, be sure to keep up the car obsession. Oh, that smells divine. Get in my belly.